Long ago, in the ancient land of Canaan, nestled in the fertile valley by the Dead Sea, there stood two cities whose names echoed across the region: Sodom and Gomorrah. At first glance, they seemed alive with energy. Marketplaces filled with voices, streets alive with the movement of animals and merchants, laughter drifting from homes. Yet behind the noise and the glitter of prosperity, darkness grew deep. The people had turned away from justice, away from mercy, away from the ways of God. Still, in the heart of Sodom lived a man named Lot, the nephew of Abraham. Lot's household was different. Amid the corruption of the city, he tried to live with integrity, showing kindness to strangers, generosity to those in need. His home was not perfect, but it carried a small light in the midst of a city dimming into shadow. One evening, as the sun sank and the lamps of the city were being lit, two men approached Lot's gate. They looked like travelers, dusty from their journey, yet there was something about them, a quiet authority, a strength beyond their appearance. Lot bowed low before them and welcomed them into his home. He did not know it then, but they were messengers of the Lord, sent with a warning. That night, chaos stirred outside. The men of the city surrounded Lot's house with cruel intentions. Lot begged them to leave in peace, to turn away from wickedness. But the strangers, the angels, reached out their hands, drawing Lot back inside, striking the crowd with blindness. In that moment, Lot understood. This city was beyond saving. Judgment was near. The angels spoke with urgency. Gather your family. Take your wife, your daughters, and leave this place. Do not delay. And when you go, do not look back. Morning came with a strange heaviness. The sky carried a pale, uneasy glow, as though creation itself waited for what was about to unfold. Lot hesitated, reluctant to leave behind the home he had built. But the angels grasped his hand, and the hands of his wife and daughters, and led them out. Mercy pulled them forward when their own strength faltered. The city behind them stirred with restless sounds, shouts, crumbling stone, the distant rumble of the earth itself. Lot's wife clutched her daughter's hands tightly as they hurried into the open plain. Her heart pounded, not only from fear but from sorrow. Each step away felt like tearing a piece of her past. Memories filled her mind, the rooms she had decorated, the neighbors she knew, the familiar streets where she had walked for years. The command of the angels echoed again in her ears. Do not look back. But the human heart struggles to let go. Even when the past is broken, even when God calls us to something greater, there is a longing to turn, to see, to hold on to what is slipping away. As Lot and his daughters pressed forward, the roar behind them grew. Fire and sulfur rained down from heaven. The ground quaked beneath their feet, the air thick with heat and smoke. The once bustling city was collapsing, its laughter silenced, its lights extinguished. And in that moment of trembling, Lot's wife faltered. The weight of her memories, the pull of her past, became too strong. She slowed her steps. Her hands trembled. And though the command had been clear, though mercy had led her forward, she turned. For just an instant, her eyes fell upon the city. The rising flames, the collapsing homes, the destruction of what she once called life. Her heart clung to it, and in that instant she was transformed. The warmth of life left her body. Her form stiffened, hardened, and she became a pillar of salt, standing frozen on the plain, a silent witness to the cost of looking back. Lot and his daughters pressed on, their hearts breaking but their feet moving. They did not turn, for the warning was clear. The smoke rose behind them, thick and dark against the morning sky. Ahead lay uncertainty, but also the path of life. In the valley of Elah, dawn light spilled over two ridgelines where two armies had waited for weeks. On one side stood Israel, weary and uncertain. On the other, the Philistines, loud with confidence. Between them lay an empty stretch of ground, and in that open space, a giant had made his stage. His name was Goliath, and each morning he descended the slope in heavy armor that flashed like bronze fire. The clatter of his steps echoed as he shouted his challenge. His voice rolled across the valley like thunder. "Send out a man to fight me!" And every morning, fear answered with silence. Among Israel's tents there was much whispering and little courage. Men glanced at one another and looked away. They were not cowards, only human, staring at something larger than their strength, unsure where faith should begin. On a soft morning, when light still rested low on the hills, a young shepherd arrived with bread and grain for his brothers. His name was David. His hands were familiar with the smooth weight of a sling, with the pull of a harp's strings, and with the quiet work of tending sheep under the open sky. He heard the taunts of the giant, saw men shrink back, and he felt something stir within him. Not bravado, not anger, but a still conviction that the living God had not abandoned his people. David asked questions gently, and they were met with disbelief. His brothers scolded him, thinking him naive. Others laughed. But David's eyes did not harden. He went to the king with respect and spoke plainly. "The Lord who delivered me from the paw of the lion and the bear will deliver me from this Philistine." Faith for David was not noise. It was memory. It was a quiet sum of all the small rescues he had known with God. Saul placed his armor on the boy, heavy, rattling, ill-fitted. David took a few steps and stopped. The metal did not belong to him. He removed it with thanks and instead went down to the stream that ran like a silver thread through the valley. Kneeling, he set his hand in the cool water and chose 5 smooth stones. They felt familiar, simple, honest. He slipped them into his pouch and rose. Across the way, Goliath laughed to see a youth walking forward without armor, staff in hand, sling at his side. "Am I a dog?" he roared, "that you come at me with sticks?" But David's voice was steady. "You come to me with sword and spear and javelin, but I come to you in the name of the Lord of hosts." The air seemed to pause. Larks fluttered, then went quiet. David placed a stone in the sling and began to swing, not wildly, but with the practiced rhythm of countless days guarding sheep. 1, 2, 3 revolutions. The leather sang softly, and the stone flew. It crossed the distance in a breath and struck the giant at the one place metal did not cover. Goliath staggered. The valley held its breath. Then the giant fell, and the earth received his weight with a low, final sound. Silence arrived like a wave. Then another wave followed, one of shouts and astonishment, of courage returning to men who remembered who they were. Israel surged forward. The Philistines broke and ran. But before the rush, there was a moment where David simply stood in the light, breathing, his heart steady. Not because he was strong, but because he knew the one who is. There is a calm that follows fear when faith has done its quiet work. It does not boast or hurry. It rests. The story of David and Goliath does not deny the size of our giants. It does not ask us to pretend that what frightens us is small. Instead, it invites us to remember what is greater. Faith grows in the fields of our ordinary days, where we learn to trust through small deliverances until the large ones arrive. When challenges stand tall and loud, we do not need armor that doesn't fit us. We need the memory of God's faithfulness and the tools He has already placed in our hands. So tonight, let your heart loosen its grip on fear. Breathe slowly. Name the giants, but then name the God who has walked with you through smaller valleys. He has not changed. In His presence, courage returns quietly and completely.
Babylon's morning began with gold on the river and voices in the markets, with the glow of sun on high walls and the steady routine of a busy empire. In a room set apart from the noise, Daniel rose as he always did. He opened his window toward Jerusalem, a city he loved, though distance held it far away. The air moved gently through the lattice as he knelt on the cool floor. 3 times a day he gave thanks. 3 times a day he asked for wisdom. Prayer had become the rhythm of his life, soft, unhurried, faithful. Those who envied him watched. Daniel had risen to honor not because he forced his way upward, but because his work was steady and his heart was clean. Jealousy seeks cracks to widen. Finding none in Daniel's conduct, his enemies sought one in his devotion. They approached King Darius with flattery and proposed a law. For 30 days, no one should pray to any god or man but the king. The words appealed to pride. The seal was pressed. The law stood. When Daniel heard, he did not argue or hide. He opened his window as always. He knelt as always. He prayed as always. The men rushed to accuse him. Darius saw the trap and grieved, but royal decrees in Babylon were iron. With a reluctant heart, he ordered Daniel cast into the lion's den. "May your God, whom you serve continually, deliver you," he said, and the stone rolled shut on a dark, breathing silence. Inside, the lions moved like shadows with weight. Their presence could be felt as much as seen, muscles beneath fur. The soft pad of heavy paws. The low rumble that lives at the edge of sound. Daniel stood very still. He did not try to bargain with beasts. He prayed. And in that darkness, another presence came. Scripture says an angel closed the lions' mouths. Perhaps the air itself changed, danger became quiet. Hunger became sleep. Daniel waited in the hush, and the night grew long, but not fearful. In the palace, the king did not sleep. He refused music and food. He paced. Dawn's first light brought him swiftly to the sealed den. His voice, usually strong, trembled. "Daniel, servant of the living God, has your God delivered you?" There was a small, holy pause before the reply rose, steady and clear. "O King, live forever. My God sent His angel and shut the lions' mouths. I was found blameless before Him and before you." The stone rolled back. Daniel stepped into mourning. The king rejoiced, and those who had plotted found the justice they had prepared for another. A decree went out praising the God who rescues and saves. Safety is not always the absence of danger. Sometimes it is God's presence in the middle of it. Daniel was not spared the den, but he was kept within it. There is a peace available even when circumstances do not shift, a quieting of threats that does not always change the room, but changes the soul inside the room. Tonight, if anxieties prowl at the edges of your thoughts, open the window of your heart toward the place you call home with God. Kneel in whatever way you can. Let prayer become the air you breathe. and trust that, unseen and certain, God closes what would devour and holds you through the night. There was a man who had 2 sons, and for many years their household moved to a gentle rhythm. Seed time and harvest, meals shared at a long wooden table, familiar footsteps in the courtyard, the sound of animals settling as evening candles were lit. The father's voice was steady, his hands sure. He knew his land and his sons. He knew the path to the fields and the path back home. The older son learned the rhythm of responsibility, the weight of tools, the count of livestock, the patient work that keeps a family strong. The younger son learned it too, but his heart often drifted toward the horizon. He would pause at the edge of the property, feel the wind press lightly against his clothes, and wonder what lay beyond hills that rose blue in the distance. One day, the younger son came to his father with a request that sounded like a stone dropped into still water. He asked for his share of the inheritance. Now, not later. He could not fully name the hunger that moved him. It was part restlessness, part pride, part curiosity that felt like a calling. The father listened without anger. He did not argue, did not raise his voice. Love, when it is deep, does not grasp or force. It opens its hands. He divided what he had, portioned out the share, and placed into the younger son's keeping what was meant to sustain a life. The next morning, with the sun still low and the ground cool, the younger son packed what he could carry. He embraced his father with a quick, awkward strength, nodded to his brother, and set his feet on the road that led away. At first, the new country sparkled. The city greeted him with lanterns and laughter. The marketplaces were bright with fabrics and spices. Songs rose from houses as evening drew near. Money makes a river that runs fast and feels like freedom. He found friends who were quick with smiles and stories. Companions as light as moths drawn to the flame of his full purse. Days blurred into nights and nights into days. Meals were rich. Wine flowed. He fell asleep to music and woke to celebration. No one asked where the river began. No one wondered where it might end. It ended slowly, then all at once. Coins became fewer, first an inconvenience, then an ache. Laughter from friends grew thinner. Invitations came less often. A famine slid over the land like a gray veil. Harvests failed, prices climbed, and the city's bright surfaces showed their seams. Hunger is a quiet teacher. It speaks without words and is understood by the body. The younger son sold what he could, then sold what he never thought he would, until there was nothing left to exchange but his strength. He found work in fields that did not belong to him, feeding animals unclean to his people, standing in mud that pulled at his sandals. The wind that once felt like a beckoning now felt like emptiness passing over empty ground. Sometimes, mercy begins with memory. One afternoon, with the sun hanging harsh and low, he paused, hands stilled on a rough wooden pail. His stomach nodded. He watched animals eat, and a longing rose sharp in his throat, not only for food, but for a table, for a voice, for a place that had once shaped his days without his noticing. He remembered the long wooden table at home, the bread his father broke with steady hands, the hired servants who had enough and more than enough. He remembered his father's face, lined with years, lit with kindness. He remembered that there was once a door he could open without knocking. Words formed, halting at first, then clear. He rehearsed them not as poetry, but as truth. Father, I have sinned against heaven and before you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son. Make me like one of your hired servants. The speech was not a trick or a performance. It was an attempt to name reality and bend himself back toward it. And with that he rose. The road before him was long and ordinary. Dust lifted under each step. The sky changed its colors slowly as hours passed. Regret walked beside him, then behind him. Then, sometimes, it seemed to walk ahead, daring him to keep moving anyway. At home, the father had learned a different kind of waiting. He still rose in the morning and walked the fields. He still counted what needed counting and mended what needed mending. But his eyes developed the habit of looking far, beyond the nearest hill, beyond the bend in the road, just in case the shape of someone beloved might appear. Some evenings, he stood at the gate longer than the chores required. Sometimes he listened at night for footsteps he knew he could not hear. The older son worked faithfully beside him, shoulders strong, jaw set, a man who understood duty like a second language. He did not stand at the gate. He did not understand the waiting. His love was a ledger, accurate and tight. One afternoon, when the light softened and shadows lengthened like long breaths across the ground, the father saw a figure on the road. The walk was different, slower, smaller. Clothes hung loosely, head tilted down. But love recognizes what time and distance cannot erase. The father did not wait for dignity to catch up to his feet. He ran. Old men in that culture did not run, but joy does not always ask permission from custom. He ran with the strange, wonderful abandon of a heart that has been empty and suddenly finds itself full. When he reached the boy, he gathered him close, and the dust of the road settled around them as if even the earth wished not to intrude. The son began his speech. "Father, I have sinned. I am not worthy." But the father's embrace swallowed the words. He called out to servants who had followed at a startled distance. "Quickly, bring the best robe and put it on him. Place a ring on his hand and sandals on his feet." Symbols mattered. The robe for honor, the ring for belonging, the sandals for restoration from a barefoot laborer to a welcomed son. "And bring the fatted calf," he said. "Let us eat and celebrate. For this son of mine was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found." Music rose like a spring from hard ground. Laughter returned, but now it had roots. In the field, the older son heard the sound and stopped. He called to a servant. "What is this?" When he learned, his face tightened. He did not walk toward the house. He stood where anger told him to stand, outside. The father noticed the absence of one child while celebrating the return of another. He went out, the way love always goes out. He did not send a servant. He did not shout from a distance. He stood near and spoke gently. "Come in. Celebrate with us." The older son's words were carefully tallied. "All these years I served you. I never disobeyed. You never gave me even a young goat to celebrate with my friends. But when this son of yours comes back, after devouring your property, you kill the fatted calf for him." Wounds often speak like accountants. This for that. Owed versus paid. The father listened without offense. Then he said the sentence that can heal ledger lives. "Son, you are always with me, and all that is mine is yours." But it was fitting to celebrate and be glad, for your brother was dead and is alive. He was lost and is found. The story ends in an open door. We are not told whether the older brother stepped inside. Perhaps the night deepened and the music wove through it like warm thread. Perhaps the father's words rested in the older son's chest like a candle that needed time to catch. Perhaps he stayed in the field, counting again, until the arithmetic of grace began, slowly, to make sense.
Grace is not careless. It is costly. But the one who pays the cost is the one who loves. The father bore the sting of the younger son's request, the ache of his absence, and then the surprise weight of running joy. He also bore the older son's resentment, met it, walked out to it, spoke tenderness over it. Love went down the road to embrace the lost, and love went out to the field to invite the faithful. In this house, celebration is not a reward for performance. It is the sound of life restored. If you find yourself far away, let memory become mercy. Speak simple truth and begin the walk home. You may discover the Father has already started running. If you find yourself close but cold, let love step out to where you stand. You have not been forgotten. You are always with me, and all that I have is yours. Tonight as you rest, lay down the ledgers, both the ones you keep against yourself and the ones you keep against others. There is a table being set, a robe being prepared, a ring polished, sandals placed by a door. The music is not loud, it is warm. The house is not perfect, but it is home. And the Father waits by an open door, steady as morning, joyful as running feet, ready to call you by the name he has never stopped using. Son, daughter, beloved. The Sea of Galilee has always been a restless body of water. By day, it can sparkle like glass, reflecting the sky with a kind of calm that feels unshakable. But by night, winds sweep down from the surrounding hills without warning. Fishermen who had worked its waters for years knew how quickly a gentle evening could turn into a night of fear. One evening, after a long day of teaching, healing, and speaking to crowds that pressed in from every side, Jesus said to his disciples, "Let us go across to the other side." The sun had just begun to sink, painting the sky with strokes of gold and violet. The water was calm, and the men stepped into the boat with a sense of relief. Here, at least, away from the pressing crowds, they would find a little rest. The boat rocked gently as they pushed away from the shore. Wood creaked softly against water. Oars dipped and rose in rhythm. The air cooled, carrying with it the scent of lake and earth. Jesus, weary from his day, found his place in the stern. He lay down on a cushion, eyes closing almost as soon as his head rested. His breathing slowed, steady as the movement of waves. The disciples let him sleep. Their hands were skilled, and the journey across was familiar. But night on Galilee is not always predictable. Somewhere between shore and shore a wind rose, first a whisper, then a rush. Clouds moved across the stars, covering the night with a weight that pressed down. Waves began to lift higher than the boat's edge, water slapping hard against wood. Spray chilled their faces. The sails strained, ropes pulled tight, and the calm surface that had carried them shifted into heaving darkness. The disciples worked quickly. Seasoned fishermen shouted commands, adjusting sails, gripping oars, bracing themselves as water poured over the sides. Their bodies remembered storms like this, but memory did not make it easier. The boat pitched and rolled, and fear found its way into the spaces between their breaths. It filled the silence between shouted instructions. It pressed close, as real as the water around their ankles. All the while, Jesus slept. His chest rose and fell. His face was at rest. The storm did not wake him. Perhaps the spray dampened his robe. Perhaps thunder rolled above his head. But his peace remained unbroken.
Finally, desperation broke through the men's skill. They rushed to him, shaking him awake. Their voices trembled more than the boat. "Teacher, do you not care that we are perishing?" Jesus opened his eyes, unhurried. He rose and stood, though the boat rocked violently under his feet. He faced the storm as though it were not chaos, but a creature waiting to be commanded. He spoke, not loudly, but with authority that comes not from volume, but from truth. "Peace, be still." The words left his mouth and seemed to settle on the air itself. The wind that had clawed at sails released them. The waves that had lifted high sank back into themselves. The great sea smoothed as though it had taken a long, steady breath. The storm folded into silence. The disciples stood frozen, their hands still gripping ropes that no longer strained, their hearts pounding against the sudden quiet. Jesus turned to them, his voice gentle. "Why are you so afraid? Have you still no faith?" They did not answer at once. They looked at one another with wide eyes, then back at him. Fear did not leave, but it changed its shape. It became awe. "Who is this?" they whispered to each other, "that even the wind and the sea obey him?" The boat moved forward again, steady now, carrying them toward the far shore. Jesus sat back down, his presence calm as before. The disciples' thoughts would linger on this night, replaying the words and the silence that followed. For the rest of their lives, when storms rose, whether on water or within their hearts, they would remember this moment. The story of Jesus calming the storm is more than a memory of a single night on Galilee. It is a mirror for the storms we know ourselves. Chaos can come quickly, a word spoken, a letter received, an illness named, a loss felt. The sky changes, the waves rise, and suddenly, what seems steady begins to tilt. We grab the ropes we know. We strain at the oars we have used before, but fear finds us anyway. This story does not tell us that storms will never come. It tells us that storms do not have the last word. Jesus was in the boat, asleep but present, silent but near. When fear broke open their voices, he rose and spoke into the chaos with peace, and the storm obeyed. Tonight, as you prepare for rest, let this story settle over you. Your thoughts may rise and fall like restless water. Your worries may press in like wind against fragile sails. Breathe slowly. Whisper in your own heart the words he spoke. Peace, be still. Picture the waves softening, the clouds parting, the boat steady once again. Remember that he has not left you, that he is present even when it feels like he is asleep, that his peace is not shaken by the winds that shake us. You are carried forward, not by the strength of your grip on the ropes, but by the one who commands the sea itself. Rest in that truth. Rest in that peace. In the hills of Judea, shepherding was more than an occupation. It was a way of life. Day and night, shepherds lived among their flocks, guiding them to pasture, defending them from danger, and calling them by names only they knew. The image was familiar to every listener of Jesus, and when he spoke of himself as the Good Shepherd, the words carried a comfort that felt like home. Imagine the early morning. The first light of dawn paints the sky with soft strokes of rose and gold. The air is cool and still, heavy with dew. A shepherd rises from his resting place and stretches, staff in hand, eyes scanning the horizon. His flock stirs slowly, sheep lifting their heads from the grass, ears twitching, legs unfolding. The shepherd calls out, not with shouting or force, but with a steady, familiar voice. The sheep know it instantly. One by one, they begin to move toward him, trusting that wherever he leads will be good. The
path winds along hills where olive trees cast long shadows. Stones crunch softly under the shepherd's sandals. He knows this land, where water runs clear in hidden streams, where grass grows lush in valleys, where wolves sometimes lurk along the ridges. The sheep do not know these details, but they do not need to. The shepherd's knowledge is enough. His presence is their safety. When danger comes, he does not abandon them. Jesus said, "The good shepherd lays down his life for the sheep." He contrasted himself with the hired hand, who runs when the wolf approaches, caring more for his own life than the lives entrusted to him. But the good shepherd does not run. He places himself between the flock and the threat. His staff becomes defense. His voice becomes calm in chaos. His courage becomes the flock's protection. And when one sheep wanders away, drawn by curiosity or scattered by fear, the shepherd notices. He counts and realizes one is missing. He does not dismiss it as small loss. He leaves the 99 in safe pasture and goes searching, calling the name of the one who has strayed. Through thorn and shadow he searches until he finds it. Then, rather than scolding or striking, he lifts it onto his shoulders, bearing its weight with relief. He carries it back, and the flock is whole again. This image is not only poetry, it is a reflection of God's care for us. We are like sheep, sometimes anxious, sometimes wandering, sometimes unsure of the way. Our paths twist into places where shadows feel thick, where danger feels near, where solitude feels overwhelming. Yet the Good Shepherd does not lose track of us. His eyes see, his voice calls, his hand steadies. David, the psalmist who once tended sheep himself, wrote the words many of us know by heart. "The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He makes me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside still waters. He restores my soul." Those lines are more than poetry. They are lived truth. Sheep do not find green pastures on their own. They wander, graze restlessly, and sometimes push each other toward barren ground. But the shepherd leads them to rest. He brings them to still water, safe and calm, not the rushing torrents that frighten them. And in that place of provision, souls are restored. Jesus also said, "My sheep listen to my voice. I know them, and they follow me. I give them eternal life, and they shall never perish. No one will snatch them out of my hand." There is a deep peace in those words. To be known by name, to be recognized in our individuality, to be called into belonging. This is what every restless heart longs for. At night, when darkness settles over the hills and stars brighten above, the shepherd gathers his flock into a fold. Sometimes the fold is a stone enclosure, sometimes a makeshift fence of brush and branches. There is always an opening, a gate. And often the shepherd himself becomes the gate, lying across the entry, ensuring that no sheep leaves unnoticed, no predator enters unseen. The flock sleeps within the circle of his presence, secure, not because the world outside has grown less dangerous, but because the shepherd stands between them and what would harm them. The Good Shepherd is not distant. He does not watch from afar or delegate his care. He is near, walking the same paths, breathing the same air, watching through the same nights. His rod and his staff are not only tools of discipline, but instruments of comfort. They remind us that he is equipped to guide, to defend, to rescue. Tonight, as you prepare to rest, picture yourself in his care. Imagine lying down in a meadow where grass is soft and the sky above is clear and endless. Hear the slow trickle of water nearby, steady and calming. Picture the shepherd seated close,
his eyes attentive, his presence steady. No shadow is strong enough to reach you, for his presence is stronger still. No voice of fear can scatter you, for his voice is the one you recognize above all others. Let go of the day's wandering. Release the weight of worry. Rest in the truth that you are seen, you are known, you are called by name, and in the fold of the Good Shepherd, you are safe. The prophet Elijah had seen the power of God in ways most could scarcely imagine. He had stood on Mount Carmel as fire fell from heaven, consuming an altar and proving to Israel that the Lord alone is God. He had spoken with boldness to kings, prayed with intensity that shut the skies, and witnessed miracles in quiet villages. Yet even prophets grow weary. Even the strongest voices can tremble when fear presses in. After his great victory on Mount Carmel, Elijah fled. The threats of Queen Jezebel weighed heavy, and his courage seemed to dissolve into exhaustion. He ran into the wilderness, leaving behind the noise of people, the press of responsibility, the demands that never seemed to end. Alone, under the shade of a broom tree, he prayed not for strength, but for release. It is enough, Lord. Take my life, for I am no better than my ancestors. Then, drained of words, he fell into sleep. An angel woke him with a gentle touch. Beside his head lay a cake baked on hot stones and a jar of water. "Arise and eat," the messenger said. Elijah ate, then lay down again, too tired even for gratitude. A second time the angel touched him. "Arise and eat, for the journey is too great for you." Sustained by that simple food, he traveled 40 days and nights to Mount Horeb, the mountain of God. There, in a cave, he found shelter. Darkness wrapped around him as night deepened. He felt both far from people and far from God. But the word of the Lord came. "What are you doing here, Elijah?" He poured out his heart, the loneliness, the fear, the sense that he alone remained faithful while others had turned away. His honesty was not polished, it was raw. God listened without interruption. Then, God told him to stand on the mountain, for his presence was about to pass by. Elijah stepped out into the mouth of the cave, cloak pulled tight around his face. He braced himself for whatever was to come. First came a mighty wind. It tore through the mountains, breaking rocks, sending dust and debris swirling into the air. The noise was deafening, the force overwhelming. Yet the Lord was not in the wind. Then the ground shook. The mountain itself seemed to groan and shift. Stones tumbled, the earth rumbled beneath Elijah's feet. But the Lord was not in the earthquake. After the quake came fire, bright, consuming, fierce. Flames danced across the ridge, heat pressed against his skin. The roar filled the air. But the Lord was not in the fire. Then came something different, a sound small and fragile, like the brush of a feather against fabric, like a breath just audible, a whisper. Elijah recognized it at once. He pulled his cloak over his face and stepped fully out of the cave. The Almighty had chosen to reveal himself not through spectacle, but through stillness. God's presence was in the gentle whisper. The voice asked again, "What are you doing here, Elijah?" And again the prophet answered. But now his words fell into a silence made sacred, where the presence of God was not thunderous, but tender. God gave him instructions. Return to the path, anoint new leaders, continue the mission. But more than orders, God gave him assurance. Elijah was not alone. 7,000 in Israel had not bowed to Baal. The prophet's despair had blinded him to the truth, but the whisper restored his perspective. The story of Elijah on Mount Horeb carries a truth that rests gently on the soul. God does not always meet us in the loud, the dramatic, the overwhelming. Sometimes he comes in the quiet, in the almost imperceptible presence that slips past noise and lands softly in the heart. We often expect answers in thunder, but God often answers in whispers. The wind, the quake, the fire, these are powerful, but they can also be frightening. The whisper, however, invites closeness. It requires us to lean in, to still our hearts, to notice. Tonight, as you prepare for rest, let this story ease the pressure of searching for grand signs. You do not have to strain for God's attention. You do not have to perform for His presence. He draws near in gentleness. He meets you not in the roar of demand, but in the quiet of invitation. As you breathe slowly, imagine the winds dying down, the trembling earth settling, the fire fading into embers. What remains is a stillness where God is near. In that stillness, hear His whisper, not of condemnation, but of comfort. You are not alone. I am with you. Let that truth be the last voice you listen to tonight. Let it follow you into dreams as steady peace. The world may shout, storms may shake, but God speaks in a whisper, and that whisper is enough. The hillside rose gently above the Sea of Galilee, a natural amphitheater where sound carried easily on the breeze. Early morning light shimmered on the water below, and the air was cool with the freshness of a new day. People gathered in groups, families, fishermen, travelers, drawn by the presence of the teacher. They had heard his words before, some had seen his miracles, and many had come simply because their hearts longed for something more than the weight of daily struggle. Jesus sat on the slope, his disciples close, the crowd spread out across the grass. There was no stage, no temple walls, no pillars of stone. Only the open sky, the gentle earth, and the hush of anticipation. Then he began to speak, and his words would echo across centuries, remembered as the Beatitudes, blessings for those who least expected them. Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Imagine the faces in the crowd. Some looked down at their hands, rough, calloused, empty. Poor in spirit, weary, worn, aware of their need. Jesus did not dismiss them. He called them blessed, not because of their lack, but because heaven's kingdom was open to them. The gates of God's presence do not swing for the proud, but for the humble. Blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted. Among the listeners were those who carried grief in their very posture. Mothers who had lost children, widows who had lost husbands, friends who had buried friends. Mourning had etched lines on their faces, tightened their voices. Yet Jesus said they were blessed, not because loss was good, but because comfort was promised. God Himself would draw near, wiping away tears that seemed endless. Blessed are the meek, for they will inherit the earth. The meek, those overlooked, the quiet ones, the gentle who are often pushed aside in a world that celebrates strength and dominance. Jesus lifted their heads. The inheritance of the earth was not for those who grasped with force, but for those who trusted God with quiet strength. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they will be filled. Hunger and thirst are not gentle words. They speak of longing, of emptiness that cries out. Yet those who yearn for righteousness, for things to be set right, for justice to flow like water, are promised fullness, not always immediately, but certainly, completely, by the God who satisfies. Blessed are the merciful, for they will be shown mercy. Mercy is costly. To forgive when wronged, to extend kindness when it is not deserved, is to give away what could have been held as power. But Jesus called the merciful blessed. Their generosity would not go unnoticed. The mercy they gave would return to them in waves. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they will see God. Purity of heart is not perfection, but integrity, singleness of devotion, clarity of motive. In a world of shadows and disguises, those who live with sincerity are promised the greatest vision, the sight of God Himself. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called children of God. Not peacekeepers who avoid conflict at any cost, but peacemakers, those who step into brokenness and plant seeds of reconciliation. Such work mirrors the heart of the Father, and those who do it bear His likeness. Blessed are those who are persecuted for righteousness' sake, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. To suffer for doing right is a heavy burden, yet Jesus framed even this within blessing. The kingdom belongs to those who endure with faith, whose wounds testify to their allegiance to what is true.
The hillside was quiet as these words fell, not because they were hard to understand, but because they were hard to forget. Each blessing turned the world upside down. Power was not with the mighty, but with the meek. Hope was not with the proud, but with the humble. Comfort was not with the secure, but with the grieving. The Beatitudes are not instructions to achieve blessing. They are announcements of where blessing already resides. They point to a God who sees the unseen, who lifts the lowly, who fills the empty, who comforts the hurting. Tonight, let these blessings rest on you like a blanket. If your spirit feels poor, know the kingdom is open. If you carry mourning, comfort is near. If you long for what is right, your hunger will not last forever. If you practice mercy, it will find its way back to you. If you strive for purity, your eyes will glimpse God. If you sow peace, you bear the name of His child. And if you endure suffering for His sake, the kingdom is already yours. As you close your eyes, hear the words again, softly, as if spoken just for you. Blessed are you, for you are not forgotten. Blessed are you, for you are not unseen. Blessed are you, for you are loved by the one who speaks these promises and keeps them. Let that truth guide you into rest. Let the blessings follow you into dreams, steady and certain as stars. The Beatitudes are not only ancient words, they are eternal.